This week's topic is emergency communications, and Bruce Schaefer, AA7PB, is going to be kind of kick it off for us and tell us a little bit, as much as he can in a half an hour, about emergency communications. Keep in mind, this is kind of, unfortunately, just a half-hour time frame, so we can't like dive too deep into it, but it'll give you a really good idea of kind of where to start. So thanks, Bruce.
So I'm Bruce. That's my call sign. I got to pick my call sign when I rejuvenated my license about 3 years ago, and some of my grandchildren call me Papa Bruce. So that's how the P and the B got chosen at the end of the call sign. So the goals of emergency communication in my mind are to provide communication during emergencies, especially when other forms are not working at all or not very well. There's some jargon associated with communication. General communication, sometimes referred to as tactical. In more formal communication is called formal or formal message traffic. Traffic is another jargon word. There chance we'll get into that far into it. But I'm going to talk about some fairly practical stuff. When you're talking about radios in general, it's not just amateur radios. There are family radio service radios that are typically bought in 2 packs. So for about $60, you can get 2 radios. There's the general mobile radio service, which the radios, a good one will cost you $60 to $100 if it's a handheld, and $200 to $400 if you get a mobile one with some good wattage. The wattage on FRS, I think, is limited to around a watt. I forget exactly, it varies by channel. With GMS RS radios, most of the channels can go to 50 watts, but a license is required. And the license right now is $75 for 10 years, no test. But that license fee, I think, is going to drop to $35 for 10 years in a month or two. If you've already got an amateur radio license, you might have a reason to get a GRMS radio because it's a different band. And for emergency communications, it can be useful. I've got a couple of GRMS radios in addition to my small collection of amateur radios. I don't know of any exceptions to the rule that FRS and GRMS are voice only. They used to use different frequencies, but now their frequencies are the same. They're different. The differences have to do with how much wattage you can use, whether you can use an external antenna, and whether you can use a repeater. I won't go into a lot about those tonight. I just want to acknowledge that they are potentially quite useful for emergency communications. For amateur radio, most of what we'll talk about tonight is voice. Occasionally, Morse code is used for emergency communications. There are some common uses of digital, and the text, the next 3 are actually sub bullets. I should have indented them. There's text digital, photo digital, and video digital. And the most common is text, including a special kind of email called WinLink. But there are some other text modes. And then you can send photos and video by amateur radio as well. The photos, it has a weird name. It's called slow scan TV, even though it's not video. And that's getting a little bit more common now. Actual regular video is not common over amateur radio for emergency purposes, but it's technically feasible in some cases. Anyway, I will probably pause a bit later for questions, so feel free to have me come back to this slide. Another reference on emergencies communications is organizations. And so I want to tell you a little bit about ARIES and a little bit about CERT. And then there's a special version of CERT here in Portland called NET. and I'll talk probably more about that than anything else, but can come back to ARES and CERT. I'm a member of the Multnomah County ARES and a member of the Portland Neighborhood Emergency Teams. So I can talk about either to some extent. So let's see, let me talk about ARES a little bit. I would recommend that most of you, if you're not already a member, join the Amateur Radio Relay League, which is a national organization, has several magazines. You can get one in print edition that's part of your membership, your choice, and you can get all of them digitally without additional costs these days. And there's some other benefits which I could go into during the Q&A. Reason I'm bringing it up in this context is quite a long time ago, they created a division of ARRL called Amateur Radio Emergency Service, which has its own acronym, ARES, usually pronounced ARES. ARES is in most counties in the US, Multnomah County is an example, but you'll find it in most other Oregon counties. And they're mostly organized to provide emergency radio communication on request by the county. Occasionally they have memorandums of understanding with other organizations within their county. They are first and foremost amateur radio operators who have an interest in emergency communication, and they equip themselves with skills and equipment both at club level and individually to be prepared for a wide variety of emergencies. Again, typically at the county level. Community Emergency Response Team is not radio specific. It's something that's grown around the country over the last 20 or 30 years. In some parts of the country, it's fairly focused on being ready for hurricanes. We don't seem to have those in Portland. But there are certain organizations in a variety of places in Oregon, and some of them are focused on earthquakes. One of them is the Portland one, but it changed its name. From the beginning, it's been called NET, Neighborhood Emergency Teams, not because they didn't like the term CERT, but because it's pronounced CERT. And there's another SERT in Portland that's a unit of the police department, and they didn't want the pronunciation of CERT to sound like a unit of the police, so they named themselves Neighborhood Emergency Teams, without knowing that that would be confusing because amateur radio people use the word NET for radio meetings or meetings held over the air. So you read these bullets, it's Portland specific. Here in Portland, the primary focus is preparing for a Cascadia earthquake. We provide other services when there's a big windstorm or other reasons why a power line comes down. We don't immediately go and help, but if the power company or even more likely the Portland Fire and Rescue contacts the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management and says, we need to relieve our fire truck from the location of a down power line. Can you send your some of your volunteers there, particularly those that have been trained on down power lines, and monitor traffic to keep people from putting themselves in danger. So we do that. These days, we're fairly involved in COVID vaccination clinics in a variety of ways. So far, none of that has involved radio, but we're not organized around radio. We're organized around emergency services more generally for Portland. When we go to down power lines, we almost always take an FRS or GRMS radio. The reason we don't take ham radios is the guy on the other side of the line may not be an amateur radio operator and would not be licensed to use one if he had one or she had one. So we take our FRS or GRMS radios and communicate that way across the down power line. But there could be other real emergencies that do need amateur radio, particularly if that big quake comes and knocks out cell towers and overloads all the FRS and GRMS systems because all the families are using them. Amateur radio will be pretty key. Because of that, we want to start with people that have technician licenses. More general or extra is fine, but it just requires a technician. But we want to teach them some more skills, so we have what we call ARO certification. If I had named it, I would have probably added another letter like E, and then it would have been hard to pronounce. Or, well, it's already 3 letters. We don't usually make a word out of that. So I would call it ARO emergency certification, but it's just called ARO certification for some historic reason. So I'll get more into that in a minute. I'm going to talk real fast and then give you lots of time for questions. The ARO program is one aspect of the Port-in-the-Net program. It's the one that I focus on most of the time, except the last couple of weeks I've gotten a little bit more involved in COVID response, but most of the time I'm one of the radio guys, if you will. Our general website that's not specific to amateur radio is portlandprepares.org, but you'll find a bunch of stuff on that site about radios, FRS, GRMS, and amateur radio. And then the page that Max was referring to before, I'm pretty sure is referring to the one we call PDX ARO sources. And you can get that via this tiny URL. And it's a Google sheet that has something like 5 pages of links, slightly well organized. Feel free to let me know if you see a glitch or would like us to add more information. I'll give you my email again at the end. We provide communication for teams, including with Portland's Bureau of Emergency Management, Portland Emergency Communication Center, so usually referred to as the ECC. During a big disaster, those teams need a way to communicate with Emergency Communication Center and vice versa. Actually, I always get that wrong. Is it actually Coordination Center? Yes, the middle C in ECC is coordination, not communication. We also provide a mechanism for the teams to communicate with each other. It's organized into 3 levels, which I'll speak to, and then I'll give you a fun graphic. We facilitate communication between team members by helping train team members on FRS and GRMS radios so they can communicate without necessarily having a license. But when we communicate with ECC or other teams, amateur radio is involved, and that's done via what we call subnet controllers. We have 9 regional subnets. Sometimes we operate only 6 or 7 at a time. Reason why we have so many is twofold. One is we have 80 teams, and if they were all trying to go through one operator, it would be chaos. So we need to divide the traffic up into 7 to 9 regions. And even if we had only 10 teams, we would probably still need some regions because Portland is so bumpy that if the repeaters are down after an earthquake or they're overloaded with traffic, we need to be able to communicate point to point without repeaters. And so we use subnets to do that. And I'll try to give you some more hints about that in a minute. And then those subnet controllers have a way of communicating both by voice and digital to the Emergency Coordination Center. Here's a graphic that you'll find both useful and confusing. Confusing because it's busy, and confusing because it shows really only one team. But I'll try to fill in where the other teams fit in a moment. There are 3 ways of drawing this. The person who created the original version drew it with ECC on left. I'd be tempted to put it at the top of an upside down tree, where they're kind of the boss, at the top of the org chart, if you will. Or I might put it on the right because information flows from the neighborhoods to ECC, but this diagram has it this way, and so I better stick with it. On the left is the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management Emergency Coordination Center. Next to the right is a subnet controller operating a regional subnet. I'm only showing one on this diagram. There can be as many as 9 of those. And then that subnet controller will talk to between 1 and 10 teams, where each team is designated an amateur radio operator on duty. That may change during an extended deployment as that person gets tired or needs a break or needs some sleep. There can be shift changes, but typically only one ARO from the team is talking to the subnet controller during any particular shift. Then each team might have a whole bunch of people on FRS and GRMS radios talking to, probably not directly to the amateur radio operator, but to a team net controller who's also got an FRS or GRMS radio. And then there's often will be communication on paper as well. We have a variety of forms we use. There is occasionally a need for us to use a radio at the fire station, or even more likely, they have a very nice amateur radio antenna on all the Portland fire stations that we usually have access to if we bring our own radio. And in some cases, an amateur radio operator might be operating from home if they had another way of communicating with the staging area, for instance, by FRS or GRMS. So I'm speed talking, and I think it's time for me to take a breath and answer questions about this diagram or any of the previous slides. What do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot of great information here. One of the things I'd like to point out, and I put the URL up, the tiny URL. That's a great resource. It's a document that has a lot of links to both the Portland Net website with a lot of information and descriptions on either how to get resources or other resources. So take a look at that. Thank you very much, Bruce, for sharing that with us. Any other questions?
I got more slides, but
yeah, I know.
This is a pretty rich slide, so I'll take as many questions as you like. We don't have to go to the other slides.
Ken Franson here. This is a dumb question, but let's say I get a little bit more activated in using my license, and all of a sudden there's an emergency, a big one. And how would I, a technician licensee, how would I help? Where do I fit in either this graph or just in the big picture? How does one help?
I can give you a little bit more specific answer if you're in Portland. Are you in Portland?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'll try to generalize after I give the Portland answer. Try to find out who are the leaders of the net team for your neighborhood. The boundaries for net teams are generally the same as the neighborhood associations. So if you know anybody that's on your neighborhood association, you could ask them if they know who's on the net team. You could also go to Portland Prepares and follow some links to a similar website run by PBEM, Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, to find out who is your net team leader. They have almost certainly chosen a staging area. So if you forget to do all of that, but do find out where the staging area is and the ground shakes, make sure your family is secure and maybe your next door neighbors are attended to, but then you might want to get yourself carefully to that staging area and say, I'm a licensed amateur radio operator, how can I help? And those are called spontaneous untrained volunteers. But since you have a license, you're not quite so untrained. And in fact, we also call emergency room doctors spontaneous untrained volunteers because they haven't gone through the net training, but they're very skilled. And we want them, first of all, to go staff the hospitals and clinics, but if they're off duty, they can come to the staging area and treat wounds if and when we have the big earthquake. The answer, for those of you who are not in Portland, is probably similar for your community emergency response team, but the details will vary from one CERT program to another.
Yeah, this is Barry Newman. You know, I'm the team leader for Northwest Heights, although I'm about to resign from that. But because we're on the wrong side of the hill from Portland and are immediately adjacent to Beaverton, I actually worked with the Beaverton CERT program for quite a while. I've let it go fallow because of a number of things, but you know, I used to attend a lot of the exercises in the Beaverton CERT program, and you know, because I want to make a general comment about that, you know, your complex, you know, picture there. The fact is that I have watched exercises where people didn't communicate, where people didn't have a standard protocol for doing that, where they didn't organize themselves with an incident command system. And it turns into a disaster in its own right. So all of this stuff has to be coordinated and communicated. So all of these things, you know, with FRS and GMRS from rover B and rover A having a runner with paper, communication is everything. And the radios are so important, whether it's the FRS, GMRS, or whether you have a ham radio operator, whatever. The communication is like 150% of the importance of keeping this stuff organized and saving lives. So and understanding how all this works is really a critical part of that. Regarding the CERT program, every CERT team, you know, Beaverton has their CERT program, Tualatin has one, Sherwood, I think, has one, Tigard has one. In fact, Tigard has like one of the consistently award-winning teams. When they have like the local Olympics, they always win. So wherever you are, what you should do, if you're not in Portland, if you're in Portland, you can contact the NET program and ask them who's working in your neighborhood, and they can hook you up, because most of these teams have at least one or two ham operators who are already involved. You can get hooked up with them even before a disaster strikes, and you know, they can hook you into their practices, and they can hook you into their, you know, their own little stuff. Even if you're not a formal member of the NET program, that they will welcome you in and teach you stuff and show you the ropes, etc. If you're in Beaverton, they have a different organizing program. You know, they just tell all their people to go to the local schoolyard, and then they'll tell you where to go after, you know, after you're there. They'll come and tell you. So there are no local staging areas other than you just showing up at your local school. And with regards to the you know, to Aries and to their radio communication center, if you just call their ECC is the communication center, the emergency communication center. It's downtown Beaverton. If you contact the CERT program, they will hook you in with their communications people, because their head of their communications center actually lives in my in my jurisdiction. So he works in Beaverton, but he lives with us. So they will hook you up with people as well. So if you just speak to your local CERT people, they will, because anyone who has an interest and has any ability, they want to get you involved as soon as possible. So the sooner you contact them, the greater the friendly reception you will get. I guarantee it. And that's for Portland. That's for anywhere. So in Portland, the reason it's called CERT, but it's called NET, is because CERT was their SWAT team. They didn't want to call it SWAT, so they called it the Strategic Response Team. And they didn't want to call out the CERT team and have like a bunch of, you know, for a shooter or something like that, and they have a bunch of people show up with hard hats and you know, and orange vests, kind of going, blah, 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 we're here now, you know. So that's why they called it the NET team, which just confuses the heck out of everyone, unfortunately. But if you hear NET in Portland, it's the CERT team. It's the same thing. So in any case, I'll shut up. But you know, I think just get a hold of your local people, and they'll get you integrated immediately.
Oh, you're muted, Bruce.
My dog was barking. Thanks, Barry. That was an excellent elaboration, and I'm glad you know about Beaver's Cert because I don't. Other questions about what I've covered so far?
Well, I've got one more, and that is how useful is this kind of a handheld, two-band handheld in the event of a major emergency? Or do you need, is the need really greater for, different bands? Again, I'm just thinking that point to point, this isn't going to work too well if the repeaters are down.
I'm guessing the two bands you have are the 2 meter band and the 70 centimeter band. Those are the ones you want for Portland Net, and I would expect for many of the certs, although that could vary. Those are the two we use. The first issue you run into in hilly Portland is are you point to point with other stations, and who are those other stations? And the most common specific question is who's going to be your subnet control and where are they? Over a week's time, there's going to be more than one subnet control operating from different locations. So it's a bit of a puzzle. So the optimistic statement is you've probably got a radio that's perfectly serviceable in the schema in the diagram here. If you know where in your neighborhood is a good place to stand to reach a subnet control. That may be a window in your house, your front or your back porch. I had one guy a few neighborhoods away in Hillsdale discovered that it was the north part of his staging area was much better than his home. And since he was going to go to the staging area anyway for an emergency, that's golden. So a little bit of experimentation can go a long way. Another answer, the more expensive answer, is if you want to build your skills and be available to be a subnet controller, you're going to probably want an antenna on your roof or up at an altitude similar to your roof. You may want more than 5 watts. And so it starts to get a bit more complicated and more expensive. But that doesn't have to be in the first year or two. And you never have to do that if you're focused at the team level. Follow-up questions? All right, please take me back to anything previous, but I'll go ahead and click to the next slide. This is a half an hour talk minimum, but I wanted to show you the forms to give you a sense. There's a 2-page form. If you've got a technician license and you want to become certified as a net amateur radio operator, the front of the form, you put some information and then you go down, list part 1, 2, and 3 and kind of self-educate. I won't explain what these are, but 4 of them are online courses you take for free. And then you make an appointment with a radio training liaison, or you attend a semi-annual workshop, or both, and you begin to work through the back page to go through the personal portable radio skills, the basic troubleshooting skills, the radio protocols skills, and the fire station and beacon equipment skills. Beacon is basic emergency something communication network. It's a program that's a sister to the Portland Net program. And like I said, this is a half an hour topic. If you want just a little bit more, I'll zoom in on that top of the front of the form. The bottom of the front page, you can read it a little more clearly now, part 1, 2, and 3. You can see the 4 courses are FEMA courses. They're very tedious courses, but by watching a series of slides with audio, you can pass the quiz and get 4 certificates if you're just tenacious. Don't expect to be entertained, just get kind of gut through it. The more fun stuff is on the back. If you do it all by yourself, it's going to be super imposing. But if you get together with an RTL or attend those workshops, lately we've been having the workshops online because of COVID, but eventually, perhaps as early as this fall, we'll start holding them in community college classrooms. Those are more fun, although we've turned the online ones into pretty functional and a little bit of fun. And the middle of that same page is the troubleshooting and the radio protocol. And some of these things will be of interest to you, even if you don't get involved in Portland Net. There's stuff that would be relevant to you as an amateur radio operator. Questions about those things? While you're thinking about questions, I'm going to make this smaller and type in more links. And then I can copy them to chat. I think one of them is already in chat, but I'll go ahead and see if I can type it from memory.
Bruce, while you're typing that, can I make a comment about the Beacon program?
Yes, please.
Yeah, the Beacon program basically is a specific radio program for Portland that they set up basically to supplement civilian communication after a disaster happens. So technically, it's not supposed to be rescue work. It's supposed to actually be separate from your net team who's doing search and rescue and medical triage and saving lives, et cetera. This is supposed to be communication nodes that are available for people to show up after the first 24 hours. And although they do use, I think they are UHF channels that they're using. They have their own separate channel. So they are, amateur radios, but they have a little box that has the radio in it. It has a little table and a little tent and some other stuff like that. And the people who run them are trained to use them. They are not ham, you don't have to have a ham radio license. You can, but they don't have the radio license. So anyone who has an interest in serving can show up and do that without getting trained as a ham or having your own radio, et cetera. So it's kind of a separate program. It's kind of a nice program, but it's not really kind of what what we're talking about here. It's its own thing.
Yeah, there's some overlap there, but you're right. It's largely separate. So I'm going to paste all those links in the chat. Did they all go in or just one? Oops, just one. Other questions or comments?
Bruce, do you have either annual or more than annual exercises that both ham radio and net people participate in?
Yes. If you go to the PDX ARO sources, and I think I typed it correct, we'll test it in a minute. It will have links to some of that, but let me give you the fast forward. We have 2 weekly meetings by amateur radio using repeaters. It's relatively easy to listen in, and for your friends that don't have licenses yet, it doesn't require a license to listen, just to transmit. So you just need to know the frequencies. And I can probably type those on this slide or in chat here in a moment. One of them is at 7 p.m. It's on a 70 centimeter repeater. If it helps, the call sign is Kilo 7 November Echo K7NE. And that is from 7 to 8 p.m. It's called ChatNet. It's very informal. There's a discussion topic after some introductory material, and people give their call signs and their first name. They go round robin and everybody comments on the topic. And a legitimate answer to a comment is nothing to add, and then you pass it to the next person. So don't feel like you have to come prepared with content. It's mostly there, not really for the content, but to get people gradually comfortable with pushing the button and talking on the radio, which can be intimidating. When we do these practices, let me get philosophical and then go back to the question. There are two things going on in your head. Intellectual things like, what do I need to know? What frequency is this? What button do I push on my radio? What's the proper word for this? And the emotional, the tension of doing something new. If you practice something enough, the skills will come and the emotions will subside. So when the real emergency comes and the emotions flood back in, you have a way of taming them and being ready to actually contribute to the situation. So practice, practice, practice. The other one is a more formal net. If anything, it's easier to participate because all you have to do is give your call sign to participate. You don't have to say anything after that, and you can listen without even checking in. That's at 8:10 p.m. on a 2-meter repeater, which is K7RPT, but we refer to it as the MC6 repeater because it's channel 6 of the Multnomah County template. And that one has 3 sections. There's the check-in to those who've checked in recently. We go through a roll call very quickly and get those people rechecked in. Then there's a presentation that lasts 10 to 20 minutes with some Q&A. And then there's a check-in for anybody that's not on the roll, and anybody that checks in that way stays on, is on the roll for at least 2 weeks. And if they check in, they stay on the roll. And then there's announcements, and then maybe a little bit more discussion. It's usually over shortly after 9 p.m. So this is about Sunday. And I'll take a breath in a minute and type those frequencies in. There are no formal monthly meetings, but we have a simplex exercise on the 5th of each month where we do some similar things except without a repeater because we need to practice and it is more challenging. You build more skills when you're not using a repeater. The good news is it's easier to connect a repeater because you don't have to know the offset and the tone. But the bad news is if you're not line of sight to the person you're talking to, they may not hear you. So we have some protocols involving relays to sort that out when we're not using a repeater. And if you want to know more about any of these and you don't find the answer on the ARO sources link, use one of my email addresses and I'll either give you yet another link or I'll answer your question or both. The ARES organization does have monthly meetings. They're on the 4th Thursday of the month. In normal times, they're at a fire station on the east side. During COVID times, they're on Zoom. ARES also has a weekly net on Wednesday evenings. It's usually only a half an hour long at 7 p.m. on weekday evening. That's Multnomah County ARES. The other ARES have other nights, other frequencies. Max, what did I leave out of your nice leading question?
No, I think that's great. It sounds to me like there might be a little bit of work. So if anybody's interested in emergency communications, there might be a little work getting things set up, making sure that you can, talk through a repeater if that's your plan, or on simplex. But for somebody that wants to be involved, it sounds like they don't have to get involved every week, but programming your radio, checking into nets every once in a while sounds like a good idea. Is that right, Bruce?
Yeah. Max, do you recall whether your schedule for Thursday nights includes radio programming?
It does. Well, so you went through radio programming a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Oh, just briefly. Yeah, I forgot.
Yeah.
I forget so quickly.
And do you actually? I was one question legitimately I had for you, Bruce. Is there resources on the Portland net that goes through the programming process?
Yes. During normal times, we teach that 2 to 4 times a year in a classroom. During COVID times, we teach it on an irregular basis by Zoom. And I was at a meeting a week or two ago when I agreed to schedule the next one. So we will probably put that on that webpage. But there's another source that I need to tell you about. Let me finish this. Let's sing it in chat. And 100.
Yeah, and while you're finishing that, Bruce, for people like Ken, and I don't think Ursula is still with us, but if you do have a radio, one of the best things you can do is program it. And that way, in an emergency, you're not searching, your house for the frequencies and the offsets and the tones, or you're not trying to check the internet, which you don't have because it's an emergency anyway. So programming your radio is a great thing, and Bruce and the net team have some pretty good resources for that.
Yeah,
So-
this is Barry. I just wanted to toss in because so someone had asked, like, do they have radio exercises in addition to the regular net things? The net things. So confusing with all the nets in there. The city has frequently, they have local radio exercise, local like regular exercises, and they have citywide simulations that they run periodically. And someone did put into the chat that there's one coming up May 15th, I think. You may have seen that in there. The radio stuff, when they do the citywide exercises, the radio stuff is always a very critical part, of the communication. And there is an extremely robust group of radio operators that are all involved with that. Bruce is one, actually, and that they have all those checklists that you saw before. I put this into the chat, so it may be redundant for some people, but who read it. But all those check boxes that you had there, they have a very intensive training. There's a lot of stuff that you have to do. There's a lot of boxes you have to check in order for you to become an official, radio operator for the net program. But they're very integrated. They all know each other. They do all kinds of stuff together. In addition to their weekly or biweekly, nets on the radio, but they're also involved with the citywide drills, that they do. And I have not attended one of the citywide drills. They've done that. They've started doing that in the last year or so pretty regularly. But it's a good way to get involved, because if you start working with one of the radio people in your local area, they can show you the ropes and show you how to do all that stuff. And then you can get some experience like you would get in a real environment. So.
Yeah, that's a great point, Barry. And I have not attended any in Portland. I'm in Clackamas County instead of Multnomah County, but the ones that I've attended when I was in the Bay Area, are actually pretty fun. Down there, they used to, feed us lunch, and it's a great way to meet your neighbors. So I put the link in there if anybody's interested in finding about the one that Barry was talking about on May 15th.
Right. And that connects to Ken's question. If any of you connect with a particular net team, some of you are probably already members, but those that aren't, ask them if they're participating in that exercise, and they may say yes, and you may be able to sit in and be a fly on the wall and to see if it's your cup of tea. That's particularly easy to do in normal times, where they will conduct most of their operations from tables and tents at a staging area. During COVID times, they would need to give you the Zoom link. But I'm hoping that the fall one, perhaps in October, will be outdoors and easier to access in the more traditional format. So I put a bunch more stuff in chat. The last one that I put in was a reference to a Google group. It's not a super active Google group, but it includes an email list, and those that join get at least one email a week from me that gives you the topics for the Sunday night nets. Lately, I've also been including the Thursday night park Zoom topic, which is tonight. And I usually have maybe one other announcement in my Friday afternoon email. Anybody in that group can send questions or announcements to the group. But don't fear that if you join, you're going to get inundated. A busy week is 3 messages on that group. So you don't have to be a member of NET to join that group. Some of the announcements will be for events that are restricted to NET members, but being a NET member is a shade of gray, and feel free to ask whether you can come as a guest.
That's awesome. Anybody else have any questions for Bruce?
This is Kirk. I don't have a question, just a reminder, everybody, if you click on your little chat icon, the little box will open up, and down by the word file, there's the ellipse down there. And if you click that ellipse, there's an option to save the entire chat. So
thank you very much, Kirk. I forget often to remind people about that.
And if you save it now and save it again in a half hour, it includes everything. It just overlays the file. So it's an easy way to catch all this stuff, even if you forgot to do it earlier.
Does it create a little file in your download directory?
It puts it in a Zoom directory.
Oh, okay. So go look for Zoom under Documents if you're Windows.
I'll go find it here in a second and be back.
Okay.
So I'll put
After you
it in
save
the
it,
chat.
you can open the folder it saves it to and then move it to another folder.
Yep.
Yeah, actually, if you click on that box, because I just did, it gives you the option of saving it to Dropbox, Google Drive, Microsoft SharePoint, or Microsoft OneDrive.
Oh, lots of choices. Max, I just brought up a different window. Does it appear on your?
Yep.
Okay. So if you use that tiny arrow PDX arrow sources, you can actually leave out the hyphens and it'll get you to the same place, but the hyphens make it easier to read. It will get you to this Google Doc, which has a very, very long address. That's why we don't give it to you. And it's got upcoming events. It's got opportunities. It's got information on how to join the Google group. There it is at the bottom of the first page. It's got training links to a variety of sources. It's got links to forums, links to lots of different articles that have been authored by local people, training materials, supplies, useful websites, information about those templates for programming your radios. And if you see something missing, there's room to add another page. So just drop me a note.
That's a great resource, Bruce. Looks like you got a lot of even the ham radio outlet and DX engineering.
Yeah, it's been a collaborative project. It's fun how these things happen. A fellow ham named Donna hosted ChatNet one night, and she went off script. Instead of having an informal discussion, she said, I want everybody to nominate their favorite web link. And she madly typed them. And I think I was typing at the same time in case she missed anything. And then 2 days later, we got together and used Google Docs where two people can type into the same document. And we madly cut and paste and created a 2-page version, and it's grown since then, all from just one spontaneous discussion on a Sunday night.
That's awesome. Anybody have any questions for Bruce or any questions in general for ham radio?
Max,
Hey, Dan.
I just, excuse me, or get the voice together. I just wanted to reiterate what I thought Greg said at the beginning. If you wish to be more prepared, but still have some fun doing it, there's a ton of activities that aren't necessarily emergency communication labeled that you can participate in. One that I particularly like to do, and I think Greg is going to speak to, is called SOTA, Summits on Air, where you hike up to a location and use your radio to activate it. And there's no better way to teach you how to set up a remote antenna, manage your batteries, manage communication, and still have a lot of fun. Because sometimes the emergency stuff is really good, but it can get a little dry or, a little thick, a little serious. And this, using these hobby aspects of the radio can really make it fun and make it, really increase your preparedness, because you learn how to stuff everything in a backpack. What do I need? What do I don't need, to be a successful communicator? There's also one called Parks on Air, which is, if you're not into the big hiking, you could still go to an outdoor activity. There's a variety of contests and activities that you can engage in that'll get you on the air as ARO for our net team. The biggest hurdle was trying to get people to turn on their radios and use them. You'd get the license, they'd buy the radio, and then I'd go, "How's it going?" "Well, I haven't turned it on." So, they're just know that it doesn't always have to be, a serious business. It is a hobby as well as a emergency communication service. And I know Max and I have done a bunch of these things, and we've had a gas, getting ourselves out in the rain, and but you learn how to deal with it, because that also will prepare you, for when things do happen. One last thing, Max, can we plug the 2-meter antenna kit? Are we still going to do some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Sure.
if
Go ahead.
we have distributed over 25 2-meter radio kits, essentially copper foil wrapped around a PVC pipe. The next thing to do, especially for those of you who don't have a antenna tuner, is to tune them up. So I'm going to be sending out a poll very soon that will, it looks like Robert, he is bringing his version. There you go. We're going to be, I'll send out a poll to kind of ask people what their availability is. And we'll probably do them at different times, maybe on the weekends or during the weekdays, just so we can get everybody tuned up, and different locations too. If you're interested, if you look at the October issue of QST, or just send me an email and I will put my email address in chat. If you're interested in an antenna like that, let me know. We do have a few more kits available, and we can get them delivered to you. They are $20. We make a slight loss on them, so not a big money maker for us, for Portland Amateur Radio Club, but it can at least help you get on the air.
It was fun building it. I'm looking forward to the tuning.
Max, somebody just a couple hours ago was asking me about what kind of tuner he needed for that antenna, and I was quite confused. And then I decided he was talking about a antenna analyzer. Is that what you meant?
Yes, yeah, antenna analyzer, and it can be like the old standby, the MFJ, or one of the newer rig runners. Actually, they're not rig runners. They go by another name. I'll think of it in a second.
Rig
Yeah.
expert.
Thank you very much, Stevie. Yes, rig expert.
Right.
And so we'll have a couple of them at the different kind of tuning parties, I guess.
Yeah. They do, at the risk of confusing things further, usually antenna tuner is an electronic circuit that's used for high frequency radio to match a antenna that's not tuned to the frequency you're currently using, to match it to the needs of your radio. So a better word for what most of us call antenna tuner would be antenna matcher, because it doesn't tune your antenna. And the antenna analyzer probably should be called an antenna tuner because it helps you tune your antenna. But terminology gets in the way of amateur radio every day.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Bruce. And that's that's a very good point. The other thing I wanted to point out, because some of you may live in apartments and things. Bruce, can are you done with the slides?
Let me
Okay,
drop that.
cool.
Oh, the red one is what you want. There we go.
So if you do live in apartments, or you want to put an antenna in the window to kind of give you a little bit more gain, this looks like an interesting, I've not built this one yet, but this looks like an interesting project. This is in the latest issue of On the Air, which is one of the ARRL publications, and it is on page 22, but it's essentially very similar to the barber pole antenna that we've been building, except it's for 2 meters, but you put the copper tape on the window itself. It is removable, but they give you directions, very simple directions on how to, solder a connector onto that and attach it to your radio. And there's some bill of materials there and tools that you'll need, and then just the general directions here. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I might try it myself. So this is another great reason, if you can subscribe to the ARRL. You'll get to pick which magazine that you want sent to your home in print edition, either the 12 times a year QST or the 6 times a year On the Air. On the Air is the magazine that's geared more towards beginning hams, whereas QST, you'd be fine if you were a beginning ham getting QST. The great thing is, though, that all 4 of their publications are now available to all members of ARRL online. So that's either through a laptop or a smart device, tablet, you name it. The price is $49 per year. They have some other subscriptions available, but I highly encourage you to go ARRL.org. It's a great place to get resources. Cool. Any other questions or comments?
Great talk, Bruce. Thank you very much.
Well, Curtis, I do have another announcement. If you know somebody or you haven't quite got your license yet, absolutely try to get caught up with one of the ones that's going on now. But if you want to start at the beginning, we're going to do a 3-session exam cram in May. And I think that might have been one of the links that I copied on here earlier. If not, I'll put it in again here in a second before we close. The link I'll give you actually leads to 3 things, but if you click on I think it's the first link on that page, it will give you all the information about the May exam cram for the technician license. If you want to upgrade your license to general, there's an online course going on at the end of April on a Friday-Saturday combination that would get you ready to take an online general exam a week or 2 later. And that's on that same page.
And Bruce, do you know, is that like a multi-day ham cram, or is that a 1-day?
The technician is a Sunday afternoon, a short Friday evening, and then about 6 hours on a Saturday. The general is a slightly different format. It's a Friday evening and then a bunch of hours on a Saturday. Very
nice. Yeah, and again, ham cram is a great way to get your test without a lot of commitment. A lot of my friends, they buy the book on how to study for your ham radio license, and it collects dust for 2 years. But the biggest way, the best way to help you get your license is to definitely just set a date or do a ham cram session.
Another way of saying that is, in a sane world, you would take a 10-week course with homework and be quite knowledgeable and pass your test, and that knowledge should stay with you for a year or two. In the insane world that we actually live in, it's usually best to just get through the exam, pass it on the first or second try, and then take a year or two to actually practice and learn this stuff. And that's the way you'll remember it and understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and come back to these sessions and join the monthly meetings that Portland Amateur Radio Club has. Also, come to Field Day and other events that we're going to have. You can hang out with a lot of smart people who can help you kind of figure out what it is in ham radio that you'd like to do, or introduce you to new parts of the hobby that you may not have even heard of.
Max,
Yeah.
I was just going to comment on something from a couple of weeks ago to circle back. And this was about vanity call signs. So I don't know if you want to go there or if you want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, just a couple of quick points on the vanities in case people, where you choose your call sign. I do a couple of things first. Before you choose it, make sure, do the call sign phonetically with the International Phonetic Alphabet to make sure that it actually sounds like you want it to sound. Because there's been instances where sometimes some of the combination of letters may not actually work out as well phonetically as you expect. Second, if you ever even have the remotest idea that you might do Morse code, and at this point you might say not, I would highly recommend you to have somebody who does know Morse code check out your vanity call sign, because it is very easy to have a combination that is not going to sound particularly good on the Morse code. For instance, the letter E is 1 dot. The letter I is 2 dots. And it's, I know a fellow who had Echo, India, Echo, and it was a constant source of confusion. And the third one, this is just sort of a little more personal, but if you live in the Pacific Northwest, and if you're planning to stay here, I would strongly urge you to go ahead and get a 7 call, because there's so many activities that are related, to our geographic call districts. If you got your call sign somewhere else like Max, you got yours in New York, and it makes total sense to bring it here. But if you're here and living here, I would strongly urge you to go ahead and stick with the 7, because it kind of, there's still plenty of activities. In fact, in 2 weeks, we have one coming up, which is called the 7 call area QSO party. And, so there's some good reasons to consider that. Yep.
Those are very good points, Dan.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, if you have a call sign with just the E's and I's, don't you go through the call signs faster? You can code it faster, right?
Well, you can code it faster, but the other guy might not copy it correctly. I had a friend who drove himself and everybody else nuts in the CW contests, which, at the time I got my call sign, back, 40 years ago, you couldn't do vanity. Vanity was not an option. But CQ, my call sign CQR. CQ is such a common and recognizable thing that I immediately, was able to be picked out of pileups, at 5 watts. So I thought, yep, this is a good call sign. But yeah, you can send it faster, Marino.
And Bruce, do you have the link for the ham cram?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for some reason it went only to Paul. Let me
Gotcha.
do that again. Maybe it's because he was the last one to post something. Here goes again.
There we go.
Yep.
So next Monday, we are going to have our guest speaker is going to talk about space weather and cycle 25. There's some interesting things about cycle 25. And for those of you who are wondering, we're talking about the sunspot cycle that happens every 11 years. And it's not so relevant for necessarily VHF, UHF people, but for HF people, people that want to talk around the world without using repeaters or any other devices. Sunspots are a good thing. We are just off the low sunspot cycle count or sunspot count, and we're actually starting to go back up. So that'll be an interesting talk.
I can give a teaser on that. I don't know what's going to be covered in the talk, but I hinted that I let my license lapse from when I had it in the 80s. In the 80s, the part of the 80s that I was active, sunspots were at a peak, and I got my technician license, got on 10 meters, and started talking to Hawaii and then Australia. And I'd have to look at what the rules are these days for 10 meters and technician licenses, but you do have some privileges, and they become more valuable 10-meter privileges during high sunspots.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it's so fun when you can do it, especially at a technician license, where you have both digital, CW, and voice available on 10 meters. You don't have the whole band, but you have a ton of space that you can spread out and make lots of contacts. Not so much right now.
Right. I just looked it up on the sheet here, and Max and I are correct. There's a chunk of the 10-meter band for technicians, single sideband, and that's the mode you would use for communicating with other parts of the country or other countries.
Yeah, with voice, so you don't even have to
Voice.
learn Morse code. Yep.
Yeah, no Morse code, no fancy digital configurations required. You could just need a single sideband radio that can go on 10 meters. And the other fun thing about 10 meters is when it's hot during the daytime, so you don't have to stay up all night. If you've got a day job, it might conflict a little bit with your day job, though.
Anybody else questions for ham radio? So now that
lots, but I'm going to look at some of the URLs first.
All right. Well, now that the weather's getting better, the opportunity to actually go outside and make some contacts is really good. I'm going to go back to the presentation just to show you guys kind of some of the upcoming topics that we have in the coming weeks. All right, so next week is going to be HF radio overview. So speaking of 10 meters, if you want to know a little bit more about HF radio, how to get into it, we'll touch a little bit on that, and feel free to ask us any questions. The next week is then homebrew and kit building, which can be a lot of fun. The antenna that we did, that was kit building. WinLink is the following week. And I think, Bruce, are you joining us that week for WinLink?
That rings a bell, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, which would be great, because I know how to set it up a little bit, but beyond that, I'm not very good at it yet.
Yeah,
and then we'll
talk. I'd like to tell you that at the end of the session, you'll be able to do WinLink, but a full introduction to WinLink would involve some hands-on, can be done online, but takes about 2 hours. But it'll potentially get you interested in WinLink, and feel free to ask how to get follow-up so you can actually be up and running on WinLink.
Yeah, because you do classes, is that right, Bruce?
We do.
Okay. And can anybody join the classes?
Say again?
Can anybody join the classes, or?
Yeah, I don't think we've ever turned anybody away. Yeah, why
okay.
not? we've actually gotten better at teaching WinLink since COVID because people can be at home with their computer and they can share their screen and then we can share our screen. Some things you couldn't do in a classroom are actually possible through breakout sessions with Zoom.
That's awesome. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, WinLink is the ability to use your computer to pass both email and other forms back and forth without the internet.
Right. It's kind of a way of connecting to the internet and sending email if your local internet was down or you were on a mountaintop or whatever.
Is it operating system dependent or is it open? Is it a browser based thing?
If you want help from me, you're going to want to use Windows, but I believe there's a Mac version. And I think I have a friend that got it to work on Linux. Max, do you recall, or others on this call know about WinLink on Macs?
Yes, so like,
Yo, go ahead, Marino.
so basically WinLink Express, the official software used for WinLink, is a Windows software. However, with some tricks, you can make it run on a Mac, either by running inside a virtual machine, a Windows virtual machine hosted on the Mac, or even more with an even more trickier way by using a compatibility layer called Wine. So it is possible. Yeah, and if you are running Linux, there is a different software called PAT, P-A-T, that is written for Linux. It is accessed through a web browser and implements the same functionality of WinLink Express. So you can participate in sending emails back and forth.
Do you know if there's a version of PAT for the Mac?
I would suspect so because it is a software that is open source and exposes its user interface using a web technology. So yes, I would highly suspect. I haven't verified, but I would suspect it works with a Mac.
And I'm really torn on this. There's a couple of you who are Mac experts and have gotten lots of stuff to work on Macs. But there's others of us that have concluded that if you love a Mac, absolutely use your Mac, but get yourself a cheap Windows machine for your Go kit. Because there's some stuff that's easier to run on a cheap Windows computer.
Yeah, that's a good point. And they really aren't that expensive. And the other thing is even, those of us who have PCs, I'm in the process of kind of setting up just a cheap Windows computer just for WinLink, something I can take out into the field and not have to worry about dropping it.
Hey, Max, I just want to bring to your attention that Stevie needs some help with antennas. So, people that wants to get on HF should not be let down. So we need to help her.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you're talking about HF antennas?
I was more referring to the kits that we got, and then you had kind of alluded to maybe an antenna party or antenna party / POTA, perhaps?
Yeah, so what we're going to do for the antenna kit that we had everybody build is a whole kind of tuning parties. So essentially, for those of you who don't have an antenna analyzer, or even if you do and you just want to join us, we'll set up somewhere outside and we'll be able to bring some antenna analyzers to take a look at your antenna and trim them up and tune them so that you can actually use them. So take a look, keep on the lookout for those emails. Cool. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining tonight. It's been a great session as usual. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to email them to me, max@nultra.com. And that includes questions, comments, suggestions for future topics. We are going to be putting up a new website for Portland Amateur Radio Club in a couple of weeks from now. And that will have all of the future upcoming topics in the calendar.